Hi everyone, my name is Reagan Booto. I'm the host of the show Tag Your Smart Moments on FHS Radio. Today, myself and Professor Leland Cox have a great show planned for you. Are you guys excited? Are you excited? Yeah. Show me some excitement. Show me some excitement. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Today's topic is a controversial one. On July 1st, 2017, the gun policy will change on this campus. We all know about it, whether you like it or not. The question is it going to be good or a bad thing? What are some of the policies that the university is going to put in place for us, we the students? Those who like it and those who don't like it. And how are those policies going to be implemented? It's going to be very interesting, and we're all going to know a little bit more about it just today. With that being said, I'd like to call Dr. Cox to come up here. And he's going to talk a little bit about the topic and the class, and also he's going to introduce our panelists. As he's finding his way here, please clap for him.
First of all, Reagan, thank you very much for inviting myself and the class to be on your program. Now, when we teach Political Science 101, a lot of times students ask us, why do we have to take this course? How does this affect me on a day-to-day basis? And one of the ways we deal with this is I like to assign civic engagement projects where the students have to explore an issue that does affect them on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of the students this time showed interest in the matter of the changing concealed carry policy that will be going into effect, as Reagan mentioned, on July 1st. So a number of the students researched it. Now, other students did other topics, but at the same time, this was a topic that got quite a bit of interest from the students. And at first, we were thinking we would just have a little presentation to the students, but then Reagan came up with a great idea. No, let's actually make this a community forum and have a panel where we can really discuss this from a number of different perspectives and see what is really going to change for better or for worse once this policy goes into effect. So allow me to introduce our panel. First of all, we have Colton Lashley, who is a student in Political Science 101. We also have Connor Shadid, a student in Political Science 101. Carrie Wassinger, who is legal counsel for Fort Hays State University. Fort Hays State University Chief of Police Ed Howell. Brittany Worth, a student in Political Science 101. And Dr. Dimitri Jaman. And these will be our panelists discussing this very important topic. So, and again, thank you, Reagan, for having us. Okay.
Thank you so much, for that. Thank you. As you can see, we have three groups over here. We have the pro-guns, those guys right here. And we have the people who oppose the gun. And then we have the legal people in the middle. They're kind of the referee, so you can see. Then I will start with the 5-minute presentation for each group. Then I'll shift the gear to the first group. Go ahead.
We just have a short statement. Me and Colton here are obviously for the new legislation that's been passed on campus, and we think it's well within our right as students as well as other students to be able to protect ourselves on campus, as well as maybe even a necessity to protect ourselves on campus. So we're for the new legislation, and we think it's a good idea that it's going to be implemented on July 1st.
Awesome.
That's about it.
Awesome. Let's go to the second group.
Right. As General Counsel for Fort Hays State University, my job is to make sure that the policy for campus matches what the law states. I'm not in a position to debate the goods and bads. My position is this is the law. Our legislators voted for it. This is the law. It becomes effective July 1. And when I say be effective, this law has actually been in effect since 2013. We've had an exemption since then. Our exemption runs out effective July 1 of this year. So with that in mind, a new policy was written because our current policy prohibits concealed carry. You've seen the signs on the buildings. It prohibits. We will no longer be able to prohibit that based upon the loss of that exemption, and our new current policy that was emailed out to all faculty and staff and students a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, shows that what we're doing is following the policy. Individuals who can legally conceal carry under the statute will be able to legally conceal carry on campus. That's what we will be doing. Now, when I say you must be legally do it, you've got to be 21. No felons on your record and those type of things. There are some rules as to who can and cannot conceal carry that are built into the statute. Those are the ones that are written into our policy as well. And actually, if you've read the policy, it specifically quotes the statute citations for each of those requirements. Some of the other things to keep in mind for violations of the policy. Violations of the policy are not a criminal effect on campus. That's a separate law. Campus does not file criminal charges. We're not a criminal court. However, we do have the right to treat policy violations like we do for employment violations for employees and staff, and student code of conduct violations as similar to any other violation of any other policy on campus that students would or would not violate. That's how they're going to be treated. If you want to look at the criminal statutes and the things of that nature, they are referenced in our policy and they're referenced in some of the other documents that have been put out there, but those are not what campus will be doing. Now, it doesn't mean that if you violate the policy, you didn't violate a statute as well and may or may not end up with those criminal charges. That's just not what campus policy will be doing. So those are some of the things. The policy does lay out what concealed carry is. It is a handgun. That is the way the statute defines that. It also tells you what proper concealed carry is based upon the statute and the Attorney General guidelines in regards to that statute, as well as proper storage of a firearm on campus.
Thank you. I don't know if the Chief of Police has something to say on that.
Well, thank you for having me. One of the first things I would like to articulate is if you make that decision to carry concealed, please be not only proficient with the firearm, but also the legalities that are associated with that. Because you could find yourself in a situation where legally, if you use that firearm, you may have a situation not only with a criminal component, but also with the civil liability. As Carrie had indicated, the policy that we have here is in recognition of the statutes or the Second Amendment. But we do have, under the Attorney General's review, the right to regulate how it's carried and in the holster process and how the gun is loaded. Finally, I want to leave you with this thought. We are the enforcement component of concealed carry on campus, whether that is the criminal aspects of it and or the initial student code of conduct. We're going to get the complaint, we're going to investigate it, we're going to make that determination as to whether or not it's a violation of statute. If it's not a violation of statute, then we'll do the appropriate referral. But if you are approached by law enforcement, please be courteous, please respond to their questions, don't be aggressive, and if you're carrying concealed, I would strongly suggest that you let them know, just for everybody's safety.
Thank you. And then we're going to go to the last group, those who oppose, and then I will have Brittany, then Professor Gilmer will finish.
Okay, well, I am opposed to this new law. I understand that we do have to abide by it, and I understand that it does take in effect July 1st, but I don't think it will do the campus any good. I would be less opposed to this if the guns were registered with the campus and if there was a test or a class they had to go through before being able to conceal and carry on campus.
Professor Gaiman?
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to state that I'm opposed to the current legislation and not necessarily opposed to guns and in general guns or carry guns. It's, you know, it's outside of this discussion. So then let me just kind of quickly introduce a couple of arguments. One of the important things is that let's just look at the picture how it is now. So now guns are not allowed on campus. So there is some rationale for that, and the rationale for that, they're not allowed on campus is here, they're not allowed on campuses in the majority of the states in the United States and in a lot of countries around the world. So there is some rationale behind why we don't want them here. And it's, first of all, it's campus environment is very different from, you know, general environment, you know, your private property, your own house, your own farmland, whatever. So campuses are very kind of complex institutions, and university representatives know a lot more about that than even I do. But for example, just to give you a few little examples. So here on campus we have a daycare. Here on campus we have a high school. And so those areas will also allow people with guns to enter. Is that correct?
With the exception of the childhood center down here at Lewis Field Stadium.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the correction. So then we have another interesting situation on campus, because campus is an environment where people are supposed to express their thoughts and opinion and get into arguments. So that may happen in classroom. It may happen in the student office, faculty office, sorry. And so, like, just a few weeks ago, I had a student who walked into my office, and he was pretty mad about the class and how the class was going. So, so that's an environment where we work in. So, saying that, I recognize that there is an article in the Constitution, sorry, not the article, the amendment, Second Amendment, that gives the right to carry guns. But and I don't want to go into the kind of legal debate too much, but the interesting thing about that, what you should also think about is that it's not absolute right? Because there are limitations of that. You cannot carry guns everywhere where you want. You cannot carry guns in the governor's mansion. Or, as another example, you have the First Amendment with the freedom of speech, but it's also limited to a certain extent. But if we go back to the guns, so you cannot carry guns in some other states, in some other cities. So apparently the Constitution there is the same, but it's okay to limit it in one place and in another. So going from there, so if it is possible to limit gun carry somewhere, why not to limit it on campus, as it is now? And so my main question is, what's the argument to change it? So why we have been living without guns for some time, and now we need to change? What happened? Did the Constitution change? Did interpretation of the Constitution change? None of the above. It just, certain move to do that. And the last argument that I wanted to present, there are many more other arguments, but another argument is that when we think about rights to carry guns, we think about that we don't want the government to regulate too many things. But in fact, the irony is that the government regulates our right to carry guns on campus or not. So with the introduction of the new legislation, government decides for all campuses whether they want to, whether the guns should be allowed there or not. So that's actually a big government approach, and not a small government. So the small government approach would be to let campuses decide and let people who actually have expertise about the workplace, possibly including students, including faculty, including university administration, to make those decisions on their own, knowing more about their campuses. So that's why I personally think that there's no strong rationale to change the current situation, and that's why the guns should not be allowed on campus.
Awesome. Let's give it up for them. That's amazing. Now we're getting to the interesting part of the show. And I'm expecting more, and I know. So as you can see, we have three different groups over here. The pro, those who oppose, and the people of the law. So now I'm going to shift to the audience. Whatever question you have, please ask and direct it to the group that you want to, and then I'll give you a microphone. All right.
Okay, so you guys only have mentioned conceal and carry. Is open carry going to be allowed on campus?
No, open
No.
carry will not be allowed on campus. We are allowed to still limit open carry. The signage that you currently see on all the doors will come down June 30th, and there will be a new sign, which is just a red octagon that says open carry is prohibited. Will be replaced with that. So open carry is still prohibited.
And then what happens if the campus does not comply with the new legislation?
I'm pretty sure Kansas Board of Regents and our legislators are not going to allow me to do that.
Right.
Like they're not going to allow me to choose to not follow any other laws or legislations with that. They'll enforce it upon that as well. We're bound to follow the laws of the state, and we're going to do so.
Okay.
Awesome. Chief, do you have something to add on that?
And I echo Carrie's sentiments. We have to follow the law. I mean, obviously, I've taken an oath to follow that law, so whatever is enacted, that's why we have a legislative process. We are a nation of laws, not of men. If you do not like our laws, you have the ability to change it, and it's through the legislative process.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Cox.
Several months ago, I believe in Salina, there was an incident where a person with a concealed carry weapon was in a movie theater, and apparently he wasn't terribly skilled at handling it properly or holstering it properly, and the gun went off and injured his leg. Fortunately, didn't injure anyone else. But how would the situation play out if a person with a concealed weapon had a unintentional discharge here on campus?
And that's what I was talking about earlier. You need to be not only proficient with the firearm, but that also includes the safety components to that, as well as the legal ramifications that that may have, because if you have an accidental discharge, the investigative agent does not know what the intent was until they do a full-blown criminal investigation. And then if you have a second party that may have been struck by the bullet itself, then you get into some other considerations that is going to create quite a burden on that individual that's carrying that firearm. Look at it in these terms. The simple act of using a restroom places a liability because you have to be safe in how you carry that firearm. We have to instruct our officers on all the above, because we have the same scenario. Now that's open carry, I'm carrying concealed carry, but every time that I'm carrying a weapon, I have a certain amount of professional liability and potentially criminal liability.
Awesome.
And if I can touch on that, in this new legislation, they actually require holsters that have to completely cover the trigger and the trigger guard area, and there can be no round in the chamber, and if it is a revolver, so like what you see in cowboys movies, a little 6-shooter, the external hammer has to be locked in an uncocked position throughout the holster with either the use of a strap or something else, and it has to be on an open cylinder, so there will be no round in the cylinder at all. So for an accidental discharge to go off, the safety would have to go off, it would have to slip in the holster somehow. It's just kind of, if they're doing all the things they need to do to be able to conceal carry here on campus, it's rather unlikely. But
Cotton?
It's not likely if you've been around guns and you know guns, and if there's not a bullet in there and it's in the holster and it's secured the way it's supposed to be with a strap over the hammer, then there's no possible way.
Okay.
Can I
Scary?
add something?
Yeah.
You said that if you're around guns, if you know guns, but there's no requirements to carry and conceal. You don't have to take a test, you don't have to pass a class. How do we know they're going to be responsible with it? How can we trust that?
well, in this legislation, you have to use these holsters. So if the gun's even in that holster, in that kind of holster, these aren't cheap holsters. These aren't holsters that you can go out and buy at Walmart. These are $100 worth of holsters. And even if they're uneducated, there could be a mishandling of the firearm, but within the holster and stuff, I just can't see a misfire going off while it's in there.
Ms. Carey?
That's part of the reason that those were written into the policy. The Attorney General's office did state that we have to allow concealed carry, but we're allowed to write in those safety procedures and so forth in our policy, and those were written in there to help reduce that and stuff, because we are aware that since the state of Kansas no longer requires a permit to conceal carry, that does mean that there is no longer the requirement that somebody's had to take those safety courses and have to have taken that training to do that. So we wrote into our policy to help limit that as much as possible by making sure those safety measures are required on those. Now, like any other policy on campus, can I guarantee you everybody on campus is going to follow the policy correctly? Not like any other policy on campus. I cannot 100% guarantee that. But I can tell you that if they violate the policy, it's going to be taken very seriously.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
What repercussions, or would you know
Up
that?
to suspension and
Okay.
expulsion from campus. I can ban individuals from campus for violations policies. Those are the types of things that can be done. It'll go through the student code of conduct for students, and it'll go through the employment side for staff and faculty members.
for violations of the policy, just like any other violation policy. And depending upon what the violation is. Was it an accident? That it was one time, it truly is an accident type of thing. That's where the UPD's investigation is going to carry in a lot of weight. If this their third accident, chances are they're not coming back, type of thing. But if it's the first type of thing, we're going to look at the whole circumstances and see, is it a minor issue? Is it a serious issue? Is this something that's going to create a safety issue on campus beyond what the law allows? Those are the things that the committees will be looking at when they're looking at sanctions for those violations.
Thank you.
I like that one. Let's give it up for them. Professor Gimel.
Yes. Well, I guess my kind of related questions to that would be, if guns are so well secured in your holster, so we can, minimize the risks. Do we minimize the kind of positive use of the gun? So let's say we have an active shooter event and the person comes in. So how much that will slow you down to react? So if you are carrying the gun just to have it with you, just like a cool, thing to have, then I don't see that this is a real argument to let you do that, because it still, brings some risk. But if you, even with this holster, can guarantee that you will respond properly to the, to the emergency situation that will save your life, save life of others, then that's where I kind of lose it. Maybe people who are more familiar with guns can tell me whether, like, what will happen. Okay, you are in the class, there is a shooter coming in the class. So how long will it take for you to get your gun ready to shoot back and to shoot?
Not gonna take me very long. Because, anybody who's carrying one, I don't think people that don't have a gun right now, who aren't comfortable with guns, I don't think they're just gonna go, oh, I can have a gun on campus, now I'm gonna go buy one. I don't, maybe, I don't know, I don't see
If
that.
they do, they're looking at upwards of $2,000
I mean-
at least to do that, because with the lockbox that you have to have now on campus, with the holster and the gun itself, it's going to be expensive just to go buy one to have one. But
And if they come into a room like this room, person's disgruntled, they're either not thinking right. I mean, are they thinking very clearly? Obviously not, if they're coming there with a gun. And maybe you're in the back class, maybe you're in the front of the class, but somebody in there who knows how to handle their gun, takes it out of their holster, cycles it, puts one in, and then takes care of business. Like, I don't know, it happens fast, but I think you can react fast too.
Then I have a follow-up question. So do we know about any single case in the American history that actually happened, when a good guy with a gun in the school environment who was a student have saved anybody's life?
well, we haven't allowed them necessarily up until this point, so it's hard to tell. You know what I mean?
Okay, so we have some states that started for some time.
9.
9, yeah. So, okay, let's broaden the question. Did it ever happen in any other environment?
Yeah, I mean, you see things all the time. I mean, they rarely hit the media because they're not within the media's agenda and what they want you to see, but I've seen multiple instances on news rather than just on TV where it does happen, where an armed civilian, sometimes ex-military, sometimes an older civilian, is able to react fast enough to save people's lives.
Do those civilians have any training to do that?
There's, I didn't look it up and I should have, but there, I think it was last year on this time, there was an 80-year-old, or anywhere from 60 to 80-year-old female outside of, or in a mall, and outside the jewelry store. She took down 2 robbers. She'd shot one in the store, the other one ran past her, and I'd actually already taken shots, and then she had taken her out. So, from my standpoint, I don't see that. I don't know. I think I consider it effective.
And that's where you have to be careful if you make that decision to carry a firearm, because if you now start acting like the police as opposed to an active shooter event, those are entirely 2 different scenarios. Okay, and you have a whole different applicable laws that come into play. You don't want to be the police officers because you're not trained to do that. If you try to intercede on a robbery, it's just like the walls here. What do you think these walls are made out of primarily?
Concrete.
Typically drywall. Between the 2 separations here, that's going to be drywall. like the sound booth that they have next door, that is going to be drywall. So is the drywall going to stop a bullet in the event that you miss? And again, I relate it back to the simple fact that not only do you have to be proficient in that firearm, but you also got to be aware of what those legalities are, the laws associated with that, before you react to it. The intent behind the legislation, in my view, is simply that you do have active shooter events. Oftentimes, people are restricted from not having a firearm and would have somebody having a gun in that classroom at that time of an active shooter. Could they have neutralized that threat? We don't know. There's
That's a
not
question.
enough data to support one way or the other.
Awesome. Thank you, Chief of Police. Let's give it up for the Chief. That's awesome. We also have to understand that we do not have only local students. We do also have international students who, by the way, are not allowed to buy guns. So I have some of them here, and I'm going to have John who's going to ask a question.
Thank you very much for granting me audience. Although I wasn't here when the panelists started the session, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't go ahead with the question. What I actually want to ask is, sometime when I learned about this, I read it online, and I understood that there are some states in the United States like Arizona and Alaska that allow international students to carry guns. But the conditions that were given were very stringent. They are the kind of condition that you will look at them and you will be like, oh, these conditions, it's just an indirect way of saying they are not allowed. So I really want to know what is the fate of an international student like me and all the international students in the six state universities in Kansas. Thank you.
General Counsel?
That's a very good question, and we've actually had that question several times. For international students in Kansas to be able to purchase and carry concealed, you have to be a resident alien. So you're going to have to complete your green card to be able to justify. Most students on their own aren't going to qualify for green card status. They're going to have a secondary reason to qualify for that immigration status. So absent that, most immigration students, most of our international students aren't going to meet that immigration hurdle, then pass any of the other hurdles to pass that. The one exception that is if you're on a diplomat visa. And frankly, diplomat visas in Western Kansas are not going to happen very often. So, yes.
That's awesome. Chief?
I echo the same sentiments. We don't write the statutory requirements, meaning the laws that are passed in the state of Kansas, and that is part of the requirement to be able to carry concealed.
My question is to the legal officer of the campus. I want to ask, what are the things that are put in place to make sure that if a licensed carrier is on campus as a student, the weapon does not actually get into other hands? For example, I have a licensed carrier as a friend, and I'm not a licensed carrier, but I have access to where he kept his gun or whatever, or I know about what he's carrying and all that, and I can actually make use of that to do something else. So what actually are the things that are put in place to make sure that that does not happen?
You want that one, or you want me to take that one?
I think we'll double team this one.
Yeah.
You can't make any guarantees. There's no guarantees in life. That would be one of them as well. But part of the policy stipulates that you have to have that gun on your person and control of it at all times, okay? And if you put it in a secondary storage, then the storage area needs to be secured. So theoretically, that would help prevent that from occurring, but again, no guarantee.
And we made that storage device requirement where it was not just key only, so you can hand your key to your roommate so they can get the gun. It has to be a dual lock system of, key and passcode key and biometrics, something else that helps decrease the opportunity for someone else to get the firearm. So if you've got to have it on you or in your control at all point in time or in your lockbox storage, the chances of a secondary party being able to get that firearm are dramatically reduced. Is it zero? No, because there's no way I can ever make it zero, but it is dramatically reduced by those safety precautions in there. And by a third party taking that firearm could potentially be a violation of both the firearm owners violating the policy if they didn't properly store it, as well as an individual who is not authorized to have a concealed carry per the statute, also violating the policy on campus. So then we would be able to deal with both individuals through the policy violation system.
Just kind of a spin-off to your question, again, that relates to your retention. When you make that choice to carry a concealed firearm, you're going to have to make sure that you retain it. Now, does that mean that somebody can't overwhelm you and take that firearm away? Those are all those considerations before you make that decision that you have to take into account.
That is very, very interesting. Yes, one more question here.
So a lot of women that conceal and carry like to store their guns in their purses. Does that mean that with this legislation that you can't keep the firearm in like a backpack or a purse, or does it have to be on the actual body?
It can be in a backpack or a purse per the policy, but it must be within control, which means I cannot sit here, my backpack's currently sitting over there. I cannot have a concealed carry in that backpack if it's sitting there and I'm sitting here. It's got to be within my control at all times.
Okay.
That meets the definition of concealed carry.
Okay.
Follow up on 2 points that have been brought up, one by Ms. Brittany Worth and then the others regarding the active shooter, that this legislation does not include any provisions that the person have any specific level of training. Now, with an active shooter situation, now, it'd be one thing if you were talking about a trained combat veteran or somebody with military training using a handgun, but my experience has been that handguns are notoriously inaccurate when handled by people who don't have a tremendous amount of training. And what I would wonder about is, rather than being an effective deterrent in an active shooter situation, that if you had an inexperienced person doing concealed carry and they grab their gun and they think they're going to respond to the situation, they might wind up hitting people besides the one who's the active shooter. I mean, I'm just trying to understand, with no provision for proving a level of proficiency in handling weapons, how can you claim this is going to be some kind of a deterrent to an active shooter?
Well, you can't. And again, it relates back to a simple fact, and I've said this several times today. If you make that personal choice to carry that firearm, not only do you need to be proficient with that weapon, but also you need to be aware of the legalities associated with that. If you inadvertently shoot somebody else in an active shooter event, you have put yourself under the scope of that investigation. Moreover, think about it in these terms. Let's say that police show up at the time that this is occurring, and you have 2 people that are actually engaged in a gunfight shooting at one another. What do you think law enforcement's response is going to be? Our job is to neutralize the threat. We don't have a clear definition of who's the good person or who is the bad person.
Well, and I think one thing, a little historic-wise, this particular legislation was passed in 2013. At that point in time when this legislation was passed, concealed carry did require a permit in the state of Kansas. In 2015, the concealed carry permit legislation changed, where it no longer requires a permit to conceal carry. We do still offer concealed carry permit training and permits in the state of Kansas. They're primarily now used so you can take your firearm across state lines that allow reciprocity with Kansas law, but they are no longer required. So it's kind of a little bit history of it. When this legislation was initially passed, because remember, we're talking about legislation that we're implementing now, but it was actually passed in 2013. Then the concealed carry permits was changed. And as Chief Howell has mentioned numerous times, just because it's not required doesn't mean it's not a good idea. I cannot make people to do it, but we can strongly encourage individuals that if they're going to choose to conceal carry, it is a very good idea for many reasons to go ahead and seek that permit.
Awesome. So we're getting to the end of our show, and then I'm just going to ask the panelists to kind of wrap up with 30 seconds each group. What kind of message, a straight message that you're going to send
I have
people?
one more question.
Yes, go ahead.
We know that the average police response time is anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, and a lot can go down in between 10 and 15 minutes. We don't lock our doors. We can't afford to have officers patrolling the buildings. We can't afford for metal detectors. So is this a more affordable way to make Fort Hays a harder target to deter people from coming in here and possibly firing upon students without locked doors?
That's actually a really good question, but let's go back to the Second Amendment. So it says well-trained militia. So if you have well-trained militia, and then you can go into this argument that there will be somebody who will protect Fort Hays campus to help Fort Hays police. But if you just have, and I'm sorry, have tons of young individuals who don't require to have any training to carry a gun, I don't think that you will feel safer in the room knowing that some of your friends who will be carrying guns.
While we're on the Second Amendment, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that they require states to permit some form of concealed carry for self-defense outside of your home. So in the Second Amendment, that is a right of the citizen.
But in everyday life, you're not interacting with humans in the way that you are in college. It's so close, it's so stressful, and I think all of us know that. And it's not stressful.
I feel like life in general is stressful.
Right, but
you gotta go to work every day. You gotta wake up. You gotta put money on the table.
These stressful topics that you're debating on in class and getting heated, and I feel like I will not be able to express my views as strongly, I guess, because I would be scared that it will go too far and then something will happen.
Well, thank you so much. So we're running out of time, and I was just gonna, I want you guys to have a 30-second.
Do you mind if I just follow up just very briefly on that?
Please, Chief.
I understand the response time is a relative. Our response time is not going to be 10 to 15 minutes. And also, as a point of perspective, we do have our officers that actually walk through each of the dorms. By no means am I trying to imply is that absolute security, because it is not. But what we do try to do is establish a presence.
That's awesome. Last words.
We're
We need guns, right?
We're good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. We're good. Great. Thank you. And then the opposite.
I was just very brief. So just to kind of wrap it up, imagine two situations. So you have a lot of people who have a right to carry guns and don't have a requirement to be trained to respond well with the guns. And you have a situation when you have people with no right to have guns. In which situation would you feel safer? Then just answering this question would be on one or another side.
Awesome. One last word for the legal counsel.
I guess mine would be pretty short and sweet. Is the policy does mirror the statutory regulations. That's what we're going to enforce. Policies are going to be enforced through the regular violations systems that we already have on campus. The students are going to be held to the student code of conduct, and faculty and staff are going to be held to our employee handbook in regards to any sanctions. Those sanctions can be quite severe for violations, and we just want everybody to make good decisions.
And the Chief of Police, the man who protects us.
And again, I want to encourage everybody that if you make this personal choice to carry a concealed weapon, that you become not only proficient with that firearm, but well educated in the legalities that are associated with it. And that includes the use of deadly force and when it is applicable and when it is not. We want everybody to be safe. And again, as I said before, this is in recognition of the Second Amendment, the policy position that the university has taken, as well as the statutory obligation.
Awesome. Thank you. Guys, let's give it up for them. We all know a little bit more about this issue today. Although there's some questions that remain unanswered, those will be answered as we're getting along together, the university and the campus. I want to thank the students. I know we're running toward a busy time, and then we got finals coming up, and then thank you for making it possible for us. And then I also want to address my special thanks to the General Counsel of Florida State University and the Chief of Police and Professor Gaiman. I know your time is very, very valuable. You have heavy and busy schedule. We're very honored to have you on our show. Thank you for showing up.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Dr. Cox also for choosing me all the time for this program. And thank you for trusting me and everybody. Yes. I want to thank Professor Matthew Clark and all the crew of the Video Advanced class. Thank you so much for this wonderful and amazing job. And the TMN for always being there for me and also my mentor, Mr. Todd Elson, for everything. Thank you so much, guys.